On today's Friends episode, we talk with Charlie Bird about his most recent book, Expanding the Borders of Zion, and we reveal the secret identity of a one-time Cosmo cougar.
We also talk about the sacred stewardship and how we can close the holes in the fences with our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. All that and more with the amazing Charlie Bird. Hello and welcome to Talk of Him for another Friends episode. We are thrilled that you have joined us, and I'm excited to be what is this? The icing in the middle of the two sweet cookies? I don't know.
I don't know. What kind of cookie do you want to be, Charlie? What are we? Chocolate chip? Oreo?
Chocolate chip.
Okay.
And then am I ice cream? Those
Your
ice cream sandwiches?
Oh, those are good.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, that's what I'll be. Neapolitan, whatever's going on. Charlie, I'm so happy you're here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
If you don't know and you're listening on podcast, I don't know why you would just be listening. You'd be missing this beautiful set, and our beautiful friend Charlie Bird is here today. Thanks for coming.
It's great having you, Charlie.
Thank you.
We want to just give you a minute to introduce yourself, and then whatever you miss, we may just backfill it.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
So my name's Charlie Bird. Grew up in small town Missouri. So I'm a cowboy at heart, but not so much in practice anymore.
Not so much.
Especially, I lived in New York for 3 years, and I lost all my cowboy
All the
cards when I did
cowboy
that.
got beat out of
And
you
I
on the
loved it.
subway.
I was going to Broadway shows like every weekend, and I was like, yeah, this is not
This
like
is
how
way
I
better.
grew up. Yeah, so I'm probably most well known for being Cosmo the Cougar at BYU, and it was me doing the roly-roly dance. It was so fun.
Viral.
Charlie, I have to know, are you supposed to keep that identity secret while you're Cosmo the cougar?
Yeah.
So is that part of your
Yeah, it's tight, yeah.
Really?
It's just
I
verbal.
mean, I've heard of that.
There's nothing like contractual,
Really?
but it's like,
But the dancers know who you are, right?
yeah, the dancers know. Anyone who needs to know can, but it's definitely need to know basis.
Okay.
You know, one time my roommate found out because there was...
This is fun. Good job.
We're already getting into it.
I know.
So we have someone there that washes the cougar suit on campus. Thank goodness, because that thing, if it's not washed, it smells horrible, right? So it actually doesn't really smell. It's taken care of really
Okay.
well. But one time after a game, it was closed, and I had to do another event over the weekend and travel. So I took it home and washed it.
Oh.
And I just had it in this like coat closet we had.
So you're like Spider-Man?
We never opened this coat closet. And yet I had a roommate that was looking for like a basketball or something that he lost. And he was like, oh my gosh.
I knew it. Did they say they knew it? Like, did they have their suspicions?
He was just like,
how can you
I understand
keep that secret
why
identity?
you're never around. Because every time there'd be like a ball game, they'd be like, do you want to go to the game? I'm like, no, I have to study or whatever. I'm
That's
always
funny.
there.
That's funny.
Charlie, this is the greatest.
This is the gritty- this is
My
the
notes
gritty
are
stuff
flying
you need.
because this is the greatest.
And there's like basically you wear makeup around your eyes
Yeah.
so it doesn't look creepy and it's not like a human eye.
Is it
You
dark?
just like black
Is it
everything
dark?
out,
Yeah,
right?
black it out. Yeah.
And so I would always it like never came off all the way. So I'm looking like some sort of like 90s punk rocker band with my eyeliner.
Like you need a long nap because you have dark circles constantly.
So he's like, that's why you're never at the football games and you're always wearing eyeliner.
What did
Yes.
what did you think up to that point was the question?
That you were Spider-Man. Like he's like, oh,
That
it's
is
the
seriously
Spidey.
as
I
close
would
to a
just-
realized superhero story that we'll
I
ever get.
know.
I just thought I was scary, lying about where I was and
Alter ego.
wearing too much makeup.
That
Okay,
is funny.
so which is a perfect
Okay.
segue into a little bit more about who you are because you were known as Cosmo
Right.
and
Yeah. So let's see more about me. I'm an author. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, obviously. My first book is called Without the Mask. It came out a couple years ago through Deseret Book, and it's about kind of my journey to self-acceptance as a gay member of the church. It's very memoir style, and I really wanted to give people a view of what it's like growing up gay in this community to spark empathy and connection. And then my newest book, Expanding the Borders of Zion, is self-published, and it focuses more on an ally perspective, teaching people, trying to give people the tools in our community to kind of bridge the gap between religion and the LGBTQ community.
it's a perspective on the how.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
book. We have it
exactly.
here, and it's available at Seagull Book. And
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I didn't even know
Our
that.
sponsor.
Surprise!
I love it. Thank you, Seagull Book.
Yeah, it's a great book.
That's
It gives you a
fantastic.
lot to think about. It's wonderful.
Let me just ask really quickly before we kind of jump from, I love that the first book gives you a retrospective. It's almost like a time capsule of what has already happened.
Right.
Recently, I was at your book launch that you talked about how this book is a lot more vulnerable because it's an ongoing story. And I felt like that was such an important perspective to have for all of us. I talk a lot about stewardship, so our audience is familiar with that term. I definitely see your identity as a sacred stewardship that you're looking over. But all of us, whether you're single in the church, you're divorced, you're married with 8 kids, and you've checked all the quote unquote cultural boxes, I think we're all on a conversion path where at any given moment, there's a snapshot of Gaynolyn, where her conversion is in 2023 in February when she's 52, recovering from an accident, right?
Right.
It tells you nothing about where I might be a year from now.
Right.
So can you share with us a little bit about how you felt like this book, you've touched on it, is different than the first book, but why now? Why was it important for you to talk about this stewardship, how it applies to the bigger organization of maybe a church community or families? Why now?
Yeah, thank you for saying that it's a sacred stewardship, because that's actually, those are the perfect words. I'm going to steal those. If that's
Okay, good.
Because those are beautiful words to describe the way I feel about my orientation. And I feel like there's ways that I have been called to serve and, enlighten the community through this aspect, this part of who I am. And it's been really beautiful. And definitely, yeah, the first book, my purpose was to give people an introduction, to allow a parent or a leader or a friend to kind of like just gain the empathy of kind of living vicariously through someone's story, taking a walk in someone's shoes, up to the point when I came out. And really at that point, that's all I'd done. I started writing the book right after I'd come out publicly. And I explained what took me to that point and the highs and the lows and how I was able to keep my faith and move forward in a healthy way. And I love that you use the word snapshot, because I think this is a new space. And, it's only been the past 3 to 6 years, really, that gay members of the church have been out and asked questions of. And I saw many times that people would say, this is who I am, this is what I believe. And coming out is a process, faith is a process, conversion is a process. So we have all these processes that are moving forward, and someone would say, this is where I'm at. And everyone would say, well, that's how to do it then. And everyone would say, this is it. That. And then as people grow and move and make different decisions, it was almost, to me, it seemed like we were like retrospectively robbing people of their agency, saying, why did you change? Why did you change your mind? How come you're in a different place than you were before?
Well, what it sounds like is you're saying this is, even in the new book, not a prescription for anyone.
Exactly.
It is your perspective on this stewardship.
Right.
And we've had the Bordens, Becky and Bennett have been on, and their snapshot was at a different stage of life. And I think that's why we were excited to have you on, because they've journeyed through some other experiences and chapters already. So they were commenting and sharing in a vulnerable space where they were at now. And I love them and they're my friends, but you're younger.
Right,
like
exactly.
I could be your mom. So that's like no shocker here, but that's a different perspective in the stewardship journey of all of us. Like what I see in myself as a 52-year-old versus what I saw in the world at 20. And they're valuable. All of our perspectives are valuable, but I think it's important to just note that what you just said, this is not to be a prescription for anyone else of like, if Charlie's doing it this way or the Bordens are doing it this way, then this is how you do it.
And I feel like that's how we gain empathy, right? The concept of Zion is of one heart, of one mind, knowing each other's hearts, understanding what's going on and helping each other in those processes. And I think if we say, no, I want to love your heart the way it was a couple years ago, that's the you I want, then we're really losing out on relationship and on growth. And yeah, that's why this book was a little bit, I would say trickier to write, because really I wanted it to be open for growth, whereas everything else was retrospective, which was a little easier to tie up nice and
There was a little bow at the end.
There was a bow. There's no bow to this book.
Yeah.
And I hope one day there will be.
And in reality, none of us have that. We really don't. We're all in the middle of some process in the conversion path, right?
Sure, yeah.
Well, and I love this concept too of sort of your journey, your path, right, to whatever, we're all going toward the same thing, right? We all want this, I don't know what you would even call it, right? Sort of a fullness, a clarity, happiness, joy, whatever you want to call it.
I would call it like becoming like Christ.
Absolutely, that's great. Well said. And I like to think, when I was reading through your book, I was just thinking, like, one of the great benefits I would like to, sort of blessings take from reading that book would be, I tried to identify sort of core doctrines, principles, realities of just relationships, you know, sort of things that apply across the board, not get caught up in Charlie's journey, right? Because your journey's yours and it's not gonna look the same for this person or that person or that person. That's when we kind of get in trouble, right?
Right.
But what are some common, universal themes and truths that we can grasp and cling to as we move forward? I was thinking specifically about a part in your book early on in the introduction where you talk about the early shame you felt about your orientation and how you fought that for so long. Would you share more about just the power of understanding your identity and connection with God and letting go of the shame, and how understanding your connection to God facilitated the letting go of the shame?
Yeah, I think shame is a very powerful tool that the adversary uses to make us hide. And I think we see that in the Garden of Eden. The first thing Satan did was say, why are you naked? You need to hide. Yeah. And pull people away from God. And it's powerful. It isolates you. It makes, secrets make you sick. There's all these ways that shame causes us to disconnect. And I have seen that shame is a theme for all people, and within the LGBTQ community, there's so much shame, and it's kind of built into our culture in many ways to teach gay youth to be ashamed of this part of themselves.
Now, when you say culture, are you talking about church culture? Are you expanding into culture, society at large? How do you?
I think it's both. I would say it funnels down. I'm from a small town in Missouri, and there were definitely things that are culturally rural Missouri that told me, I need to act different. I need to hide this.
Cowboy.
Yeah, cowboy. Cowboy who wants to go to a Broadway show, right? But then in the church too, there were so many ways that I was like, I'm different. I don't fit in. I need to hide this, or I'll be rejected. Yeah. And that's scary. And yet we also know that back in the Garden of Eden, God says, why do you hide from me? Like please don't run. Yeah. And it's courageous. It's scary to be vulnerable and say that this is me, this is who I am. I'm stepping out of this shame. And yet that's when healing begins. That's when hope comes back. And I really don't think there's any shame that can withstand the power of love and light. And that's why I'm just so passionate about bringing the parts about us that we think are wrong or unlovable. If we bring those light, if we give those to God, He can love them, and that shame dissipates.
It's the woman at the well, right? Yeah, when Jesus is so clear who she is and what she's presenting herself as, and He's like, I see you and I love you, and she's like, and I see you, and I'm not going to go meet with the bishop before we have a conversation. I'm going to just stay right in this space, which is intimate.
I have a friend who said we worship a God who coaxes us out of the bushes. Right? And it's interesting how if Adam and Eve would have stayed in the bushes, right, in their shame, that's a dark place. But as soon as they came out, what did they encounter? Love and hope. He's like, guys, we've got Jesus here. This isn't a surprise to me. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, and I think so much of the division in this space comes from that shame and from people who want people like me to stay in the bushes. Yeah. Because it seems tidier, it seems more comfortable.
You don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. And look at where we're at. There's a lot of ways that this has led to divisions in families and congregations and communities. And I hope that through being honest about my experience and sharing what I've learned in the process will allow people to come out of the bushes and be met with the love that's going to keep people together.
Yeah. Will you respond to a statement for me? I'm really curious just to hear your response. I always tell my students, I'm not looking for a right or wrong or specific answer. I just love asking questions. I want to know what people think and see what their reactions are. After reading about halfway through your book, this question came to my mind, or this statement, and I wanted to know how you felt about it.
Okay.
My covenants are more important than my orientation. those are my words. I don't think you said that exactly in your book anywhere. I don't want to like ascribe it to you falsely, but I just don't. How do you feel about that? How would you respond to that statement? Would you correct it? Would you change it? Would you? What would you say?
I think I would definitely adjust it.
Yeah, what would you say?
And I think, right now there seems to be this view that identities compete with an identity as a child of God, and I do think that's beautiful. Like I definitely, President Nelson, I was at that worldwide devotional when he said we should identify first as children of God, as children of the covenant, and as
be careful of all the other labels.
Right. Yeah. And yet, I have found for me that I can't fully keep my covenants unless I'm honoring my orientation. So I don't see them at odds with each other, and society does.
Can you flesh that out a little more? That's a cool insight.
Of course,
to me.
I'd love to.
How you can't? Let me just try to restate that. You can't keep your covenants, be true to your covenants, unless you are honoring your identity. Okay, talk to us about that.
I think it comes back to what you said at the beginning, how it's like this sacred stewardship. And I really believe that understanding my orientation has allowed me this conduit to figure out more about my eternal identity. And they're not at odds. If I put them in two separate spaces, that tears me apart. But if I align them, then I can see how God can work through me and how I can be an instrument in his hands. And I think one of the most powerful realizations I had was I was in sacrament meeting one day and thinking of really like taking Christ's name upon me. And I was thinking, I want to do this more. I want to take Christ's name upon me. And I just had this thought of, I can't do it if I'm pretending to be someone else. I can't take Christ's name upon me pretending to be somebody else.
Because Christ doesn't fake any. He's real.
He's one.
He's open.
I have to show up as myself. And so, will you read your statement again?
Yeah. My covenants are more important than my orientation.
I would say like my covenants are achieved with all parts of who I am.
Or you can't keep your covenants without honoring all parts of who you are. Or recognize. That's interesting.
Well, and
that gives me a lot to think about. That's great.
Because I mean, one of the greatest covenants that I've made is to give my time and talents and efforts to build the kingdom
all
of
that
God,
you are. Yeah.
all that I am. So how am I going to do that? It's impossible for me to keep my most sacred covenants if I'm taking a part of myself out.
And can I just say that principle you just taught there applies across the board to every human being.
Stewardship.
Not just to someone in this, what we're referring to as LGBTQ space, something like that. Anyone, me, who am I being true to who I really am?
Or over half the singles of the membership of the church that are navigating paradoxes, or whatever the stewardship is. I think it goes back to add to your answer maybe, is that when we're not whole with who we are, we're probably still in the shame behind the bush. And when you're in shame, it's really hard to keep covenants because you're in shame. You usually make choices that are about numbing that keep you in shame, versus if you're in the conversion path of wrestling and keeping covenants, it feels like you have to bring your whole self to that. You can't. You are distracted by shame.
This word wrestle is awesome. And I think so many times we want to avoid tension.
Yeah.
And yet.
Not on this show, by the way.
No, I just think growth comes from tension. And 100%. I think about two things as far as like religious tension. Like the restoration. Like we wouldn't have had gospel truth restored if there hadn't have been tension. And someone who's like, I'm going to step into this tension. I'm going to pray. I'm going to study. I'm going to seek. And I'm going to go to God. And that's when the illumination came. That's when restoration happened. And then I also think, I actually heard this first on a podcast with Xandra Vanes and Laurel Christensen Day. And they had this beautiful discussion about how the role of the Holy Spirit is comforter. And so if we're not willing to step into discomfort, the Holy Spirit can never truly fulfill its role.
That's cool.
And so I'm just like, you know what, let's move forward. If there's tension, if there's discomfort, I want to be in that space because I want the growth.
Well, and this goes to, I think the question I'd like to ask is that one of the powerful things that come from podcasts and social media is that maybe 20 years ago, you knew your same 30 people, especially if you grew up. I grew up in a small farming town too, raised pigs. Don't mock me. He mocks me about that. I'm a pig lover.
There's nothing wrong about being a pig farm. It's just your, perception of them as being the most noble creation in the animal kingdom.
Yes. Okay. So my point is that sometimes your circle of friends and influence, your perspective and lenses came from maybe within your zip code.
Yeah.
And because of social media and podcasts like this, we found this in doing this show, especially with some of our friends' guests, that all of a sudden people in our audience are hearing a perspective or a story. And because it's not someone that they birthed or married, right? It can feel more accessible or less triggering. Maybe that's
for sure.
And because of that, and I'm so grateful for the courage and vulnerability you share. But one of the things in the book that I really love is the analogy you give with the Good Samaritan, and the idea that in that biblical account, it was proximity was the problem. Is that those that were passing by literally didn't know the story of the individual and weren't willing to sit and take the time. And the Good Samaritan was willing. They didn't move in together and become roommates, as far as we know from the record, right? Like he did what he could within his stewardship to help in that moment. And so I guess what I would like to ask is, as we have the power of understanding stories either via podcast, via social media, or reading books, can you talk a little bit about how that relates to, and you did a lot of this in the first book, but what would you say more to someone that hasn't read either of the books about your story that kind of gives a perspective and proximity? Maybe you're the first person. I mean, really, maybe you're the first person that was like, wait, is he talking about keeping his covenants and he's saying he's a gay man and their mind is being blown? Or they're like, okay, that uncomfortable thing that Charlie just was referencing that the Spirit can comfort me on, but it deals with a family member. I'm not ready to go there, but I'll sit and listen to talk of him and I'll hear a little bit of Charlie's story. What would you want to say to those passing by you on the road?
Yeah, I feel like that what you alluded to is, to me, I kind of view that as part of the gathering of Israel, right? We're gathering people, we're gathering thoughts, we're gathering testimony and conversion stories. And it's moving, it's moving us forward into this place we've never been to. I really loved this analogy, this parable of the Good Samaritan, because I think in a very real way, LGBTQ individuals in the church are downtrodden. And there's currently the latest figure I saw was that gay youth are up to 5 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to straight peers. And so there's this, physical death threat that's colossal. And also there's this component of spiritual death where gay individuals feel like they are rejected by church. They can't hold testimony. They feel like they need to hide from God. And it feels like for so long, people are just okay with that. Or they make excuses as to why not to enter into that space.
To walk past on the road to Jericho.
Yeah, and that the priest walked by and was like, I need to get to the temple, I need to go do my church duties. And maybe like a modern day application would be someone saying being gay isn't really Christian. That's not a church thing. That's bad. So I'm just going to not touch that. Right. And then this other person, the Levite, for social reasons was like, that's not a clean person. And maybe the modern day application would be like, you know what? It's not going to be cool if I'm hanging out with a gay person. It's not, I don't want to be made fun of. I don't want to cause drama or friction in my community or in my neighborhood. So I'm just not going to go there. And if we continually pass these individuals, suicide rates will stay high and spiritual death will continue to happen. And I really, really believe that we need Samaritans, like people who have charity, like Christ's charity went there, even though it wasn't Christ's problem. Like my sins were not Christ's problem. And yet he was willing to die for me, to save me. And so, it's so easy to think, that person's situation isn't my problem. That's their issue. But that lacks charity.
The us and them that you talk about in the book.
Yeah.
Charlie, if you don't mind sharing, how is your relationship with your family around all of this? Is it complex? Is it troubled? Is it smooth? Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, it's very simple, and it's very. I'm just so lucky to have such a good family, and I really think it's because they never walked by me. I came out of the bushes, so to speak, and they said, "I love you. I see you, and I want to know why you were hiding, and I want to know how to keep you out here forever."
Oh, that touches my heart, man. That's
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And so, I've seen this issue of orientation or, like sexual identity, as people say. I don't like saying sexual identity because it's so much more than sexual. Like
Sure.
it's like orientation isn't sexual. It's much
identity.
fuller than that.
Yeah.
But I've seen it break apart many families.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to.
Well, I'd love to just add sort of my testimony and experience to that. I have a brother who's gay, and I remember it was quite some time ago when he came out to the family and he said, I can't navigate this anymore, the church and being gay. And he's just like, so I'm going to leave and just pursue a different lifestyle. And that was, okay, so now this is my part of the journey is, okay, what does this mean with my relationship with my brother? How do I continue? And I remember we had a conversation. I don't remember all the specifics, but I remember the general gist of it, where he was like, do you agree with the lifestyle I've chosen to live, which was an active gay lifestyle, with...
What do you mean by lifestyle?
Entering into relationships with guys sexually and things like that. Is that, you tell me a better way to phrase all that.
He started pursuing romantic relationships.
Yeah.
He started dating. He wanted to marry someone.
Yep, right. And so obviously my mainstream Christian Orthodox Mormon beliefs, I'm like, well, we believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and so do I agree with that? Do I not agree with that? Do I have to agree with that in order to love my brother or whatever, right? And so I'm wrestling with this, and he called me early on in this process, and he said, do you agree with my lifestyle? Meaning the romantic side of things. And I said, well, no, because it's not my beliefs. Like, I don't believe that is the right course. No, I don't believe that necessarily leads to like happiness. I was kind of wrestling with it, and he said something to the effect of, if you don't believe that, then you don't love me, like you can't accept me. And I was like, well, it doesn't feel like it should be that way. Like it feels like I should still be able to love you because I do. And that's what I remember saying to him. I remember saying, look, I have my beliefs, and it's going to be an evolution. It's going to be a process moving forward to me. You have your beliefs, and it's going to be an evolution and a process moving forward. This is what I know. I love you, and there's nothing more I want than for you to be happy. That's all I want. And if you are more happy here than there, I want you here. You know what I'm saying? Like, genuinely, that's all I know. That's all I know is that I love you, and I want you to be happy. But we're not going to always agree. And so please, I remember asking him, can you give me space to share a difference of beliefs and still feel loved by me? And I remember he was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And he acknowledged sort of the need for this reciprocity of me giving him space, him giving me space. Can you speak to that at all with your family, or maybe just relationships with others where that same sort of moment had to happen?
Yeah, I feel like there has to be grace on both sides.
Yeah.
And why would we want to be in relationships without grace? We're in a fallen world, and humans hurt each other. And if we're always going around saying, oh, you hurt me, so that's not love.
Right.
Like that's lacking some Christ-like grace.
There's some dead ends, right?
There's some dead ends. When I remember having a discussion with my mom, and she said, Charlie, whatever your life looks like, whatever you choose, I want to be part of it. And I want you to know that I want to be part of it. Don't hide it from me. And, that was really beautiful to me because I saw her honor my agency. And I think that's kind of like a ticket that we don't always get right or get punched, and is honoring people's agency. And I think, one of the greatest gifts God has given us, the first gift was agency, the ability to choose. And it's hard when people are making choices, or it can be hard when people are making choices that maybe you would say, I don't see how he could be happy that way. And yet, I really believe expressing love and honoring agency is how God works. Yeah. And that's going to allow more grace.
And I just don't think there's more required of us. That was my realization as a brother. It's like I'm not required to try to sort all. What I'm required to do is to stand. I love him, and we have a wonderful relationship. Yeah. And I love his husband. Two of the greatest people on planet Earth.
And they're supports of our show.
Yeah, if they walk in the room, they're your favorite people in 5 minutes. You know what I mean? And so
can I just interject on this too? As diverse as our audience is, I think one of the most common threads is all of our audience has someone they love that they're wrestling with this exact paradox questioning, agency wrestling intersection. And I think it's such what you just offered and what John just showed in real time by sharing in retrospect is why one of the main reasons I wanted you to come on the show, because it is creating, people are blowing up bridges in their relationships because they don't even know how to step into the conversation. Right. They don't have the words. And so when you both were talking, it was like we're literally giving language for the conversations that are going to happen a week from now, where they're sitting at a table or they're on the phone or someone gets a text and they're like, what's the next response? So I love what you shared, and I loved what you shared, that really that's what I write about in the stewardship principle. If we don't honor agency, we're literally taking out the main ingredient for this whole school of life that God wanted us to use. And when we don't give space, especially to my adult children, to have their navigation tools start to work, and it's always about what I'm saying is what their mama used to say, that doesn't help them progress. And so I love that your mom was like, I don't know how it's going to look, but just so we know before we go forward, I want to be a part of the story. Some moms aren't, and dads, that's a harder place to be. They don't know how. They don't know how.
Well, I've seen a lot of people in this space feel the need to defend their beliefs, defend the faith. Yeah. And I think that sounds really nice. It sounds very dutiful. I think in practice, what that does is put people in a defensive position. And there is contention here. And it's because, in part, on one side, people are saying, I'm going to defend Christ against you. And that's really how it's painted. And defense, offense, counterattacks, war, that Christ is peace, and I don't know if, does that make sense?
Yeah, and so instead of actively feeling you have to defend your belief as a family member, what language can we use to help them feel comfortable you can still retain your beliefs. They can be different. Imagine how few relationships we'd have if it was required that we have the same beliefs before we love each other.
Yeah, we'd have no relationships.
And so I want people to know that you can still differ in the beliefs of your siblings or children that are in the LGBTQ community and still have loving, rich relationships.
And respect.
Just like someone you might disagree with on a political thing or something that, why do we make that a requirement?
Well, what I would say is rather than, go on the defensive immediately, I would say get curious. Ask, say, brother, what's it been like for you dating? Who are you dating? What kind of people do you like? How have you grown? How have you changed? Have you learned anything about God or spirituality or faith? And
I like that.
What about church was hard? If we are curious about people, that's what's going to allow us to connect. And we can see ways that, we might have biases or be wrong. And we can also, that it allows them to get curious about faith and hold on to things, because it really is so us versus them right now. And it's I remember that the moment I came out, I was second counselor in my elders quorum presidency. I had a temple recommend. I came out in the Deseret News, and immediately everyone said, "What's it been like leaving the church?"
And you have
fascinating.
Not at all.
Yeah, interesting.
And so we gotta throw this us versus them.
We tell ourselves a whole story.
We gotta throw this out, and it's because no one's getting curious, and everyone's saying, "Well, I don't know how to love. I don't want to condone." I would just invite people to all of that, that approach obviously isn't working very well. So let's express love, let's honor agency, and let's get curious about who people are. And I think that's when we're going to come to Christ. Instead of defending Christ and putting Christ behind us, let's put Christ right in the middle and have him teach us.
Be the facilitator.
Yeah. You tell a great story of the makeup cow.
I thought that was hilarious how you described the cow.
And as a pig farmer, I used to help
Did you ever have just a really beautiful pig?
Oh, yeah. Her name's Gertrude, by the way. There's a whole story about Gertrude. She was...
I bet she was amazing.
She was so amazing.
That was great, Charlie.
Let's get her back.
She was incredible.
Let's get her back on her high.
Okay.
Stay curious, Charlie.
Remember? Yeah, I was just going to say, have a little empathy, farm boys, for me, a little bit here. But I love this story because there's a hole in the fence. You lose your makeup cow. That's your favorite cow. And you get really, I've been bit by chiggers. So when you said chiggers, I was like, woof, and ticks. Navu, shout out to Navu. You go rescue and it helps you have that real life parable come to mind of Christ going after the one of the 99. And you talk about this kind of hole in the fence. I think if I was to try to use one story to describe maybe your why for the book, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, it would be probably that story in the Good Samaritan, because it's about building Zion. And what are we doing? You talk about that people are leaving not because of just sin, but because of pain. And that we can do more, to close the holes in the fences, so to speak, so that a brother has space, or a sister has space, or an individual that is non-binary has space to come and sit in a pew at church, or sit at a Thanksgiving table and have a conversation with family and friends. Can you talk a little bit about, if you had to share, and church leaders watch this show and family members watch this show and they're trying to understand how to make space or repair holes in fences in their congregations or their families, if I had to pin you down for like a top one or two suggestions, what would you do? What would you say as a how for how to start mending a hole?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is proximity. Like, we have to know the stories of LGBTQ individuals. We have to know why church is painful for them. We have to know where they're getting lost. We have to be able to recognize the pain that they harbor before it turns into anger, before it turns into bitterness. That's the primary emotion. And I think I've just seen so often people are like, well, gay people leave the church and they're mad and they don't like shut up about it. And I've heard that so many times from so many different people. And anger is the secondary emotion.
Of course, it's pain.
And behind that, there was pain. There's suffering. And if we can realize that and get to know people's stories and be able to, in our own spheres of influence, start identifying suffering, then we can help people. We can be compassionate. We can be that Samaritan. And then on top of that, I just think I always come back to visible love and support.
That's great.
This isn't, I'm gay, but if I just showed up here and you didn't know anything about me, you wouldn't know that. Like, this isn't something you can see. And so in all of our spaces, at church, at community events, in Sunday school, there are
Thanksgiving
tables in families, grandchildren. Who knows? You don't know who might be LGBTQ and still be hiding in the bushes. But the one thing I know is that they're probably hypervigilant. They're looking for signs. Is it okay to come out? Is it okay to be myself? And, growing up, I was always hypervigilant of what kind of words people were using, and they were sending me signals. I'm loving, I'm safe, or I'll reject you. And so we need to be on our A game. Like, this isn't something we can casually go through life and be like, oh, there's no gay people here, so I can say whatever I want. Like, no, we need to know these stories and recognize that this is happening and that we need to portray in a way that allows people to come to Christ.
Can I offer too that the relationships I have with members in and outside of members of the LGBTQ community in and outside of the church have taught me more about Jesus than about sitting in paradoxes and wrestling when the bow isn't at the end of the chapter yet, and there's questions more than there are answers, and there's triggers more than there are like uncomfortable conversations, maybe. They have taught me when they raise their hand in a Sunday school class and say something that I'm like, we want it to be a safe space in a Sunday school class because I want to learn from people that have a race stewardship different than mine, an identity stewardship different than mine, maybe a political stewardship different than mine, right? That to me, the diversity is our divinity. And when we don't allow for that or work towards that, we are robbing ourselves from a window into heaven, in my opinion.
Gorgeous.
Thanks. But I think you can go to people, and I'm grateful for those in other stewardships that have made it safe for me to go to them and go, I don't think I have language around this. I don't have empathy. I don't have understanding. I don't even know what I'm saying that might be triggering you. Because I can hear some of our audience like, I didn't know that wasn't politically correct. I didn't know that was causing pain. Then if you don't have a friend within a stewardship that you want to understand better, go find them and say, can you help me? I'm not putting it all on your shoulders, but can you be a safe space for me to learn? I have loved when people have come to me and said, I haven't lost someone to suicide like you have, or I don't have a chronic illness. Can you help me understand what is helpful if you are navigating that? It makes me feel seen, even though they haven't done anything wrong yet. Like some of that fear is on the other side where someone doesn't know a Charlie Bird that is willing to sit in that conversation. But hopefully they watch this episode or they share it with someone because it starts that conversation. Sorry, I have all the emotions. Oh my gosh. That was so much. Okay.
That may be the first hug on set during a show.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah, I just think I've learned more about Jesus from people that have navigated some really difficult stewardships.
Yeah.
And our church communities, depending on where they're located. I mean, you live for a time in New York. Those wards are a very different experience than worshiping in a ward in Zimbabwe or a ward in Pace in Utah.
Right.
And so sometimes we think something is gospel, and really it's proximity to culture of that area.
Right.
And so that I'm grateful for what I've learned about Jesus from those that are navigating this similar stewardship. And I'm grateful for those that have been patient with me when I've said the wrong thing, when I've stepped in it, that they've allowed me to have those uncomfortable conversations. And I think sometimes we just don't know what to say. It's okay to say, I don't know what to say. Can you help me understand? That's enough, right? Would you add anything to that? Okay.
Amen. I'm adding an amen.
Okay, perfect.
How about we give you one more talking prompt here? Okay. Ready? Obviously, in your book, you talk a lot about covenants and how you are committed to and love your covenants. And your invitation a number of times for us to focus on sort of our common identities as children of God, as you call it, covenant disciples of Christ a couple times. I also loved how you equated discipleship with advocacy. Just because that's what Jesus was, an advocate for people on the peripheries, on the fringes. Right. We were wondering if you could maybe finish this conversation with just sharing the experience with our audience that you share in your book about going to the baptistry and seeing that individual.
My best friend's watching, and this was her favorite story. She's like,
I'm so glad.
Please ask Charlie. That was the best story.
So if you could tell
tender.
the story, and then maybe we turn that into sort of just the metaphor of, there's space where you belong. We need you. Don't leave.
Testimony.
All yours.
Yeah, so I was working at this security consulting firm. It was this beautiful building right on 5th Avenue in Central Park South. And
the dream.
It was the dream. It was amazing. And during my workday, I kept getting texts from the steak temple night. And it was through this giant WhatsApp group. And so it's just pinging my phone. And at this point, the temple was really a source of pain for me because I didn't really see how I fit in. I was like, I was almost at the point where I was like, what's the point in going if you're gay? Like why? And I didn't want to go. I tried to go multiple times, but I just felt disappointed or anxious. And so it was almost like every time I would get this text, I would just be like, it was like this reminder of something that I hadn't figured out, and I just wanted to not deal with it. Yeah. And so I made this resolve not to go, and I walked out, and I was trying to distract myself. So I signed up for a group fitness class at the gym I was going to, and in the book, I remember I wrote, the decision felt like a rock in my shoe, and it really did, because with every step on the way to the gym, I was just thinking, no, like I want to go to the temple. Like I want that old worship that I used to have when none of this was on my mind, when I could just connect with God. So I walked across Central Park, went over to Lincoln Center, and I was just sitting there looking at the temple and thinking like, you know what, if I don't feel comfortable going in, at least I'll just look at it and say, God, I'm thinking about you. And yet still I'm looking around and there's noise, there's the city, there's pigeons flying everywhere. And, you know, it was quite chaotic. And then I just look at the temple and I'm like, I got some soundproof walls in there. And just, you know, thinking
If you've ever been in that temple too, right? It is so soundproof.
It just is like, it's like this little oasis of peace.
Yes.
And I was just like, man, my heart needs that oasis of peace. And I was like, you know what? I feel the same way as I look now. I'm like, not as dressed formal enough as I should be.
No, you're great.
But it was good enough because I was in like some business casual clothes, and I walked through and said, hey, I'm here for Steak Temple night. And the whole time I'm screaming, like just this part
Inside.
of me that's just like, don't do this. You're gay. It's just going to add more stress to your already stressful life. And I said, I'm here. I want to do an endowment session. And this wonderful woman at the
Recommend us.
the recommend desk says, thank you. I was going to say the gate.
The gatekeeper.
Well-
The gatekeeper.
The gatekeeper. She says, actually, you know what? We haven't had very many men show up, or many priesthood holders show up, and we could really use help in the baptistry if you'd be willing to do that. I was like, oh, actually, that'd be awesome. I haven't done a baptism in forever. So I went downstairs, I changed, I walk out, I'm just, you know, like kind of feeling better. And there was one other individual from our stake who had showed up, one other priesthood holder, and he was also gay. And I'd met him once before. He was in a different ward, and we'd had a brief conversation about orientation, and it was months prior. And I was, you know, in my mind, there was no way he'd still be active in church because I didn't know very many people who were. And yet he was there. And because he was there and because I was there, we had enough people to do the ordinances. And there were all these women from our stake because women show up. and it was just amazing that like I found belonging there on so much deeper of a level than I anticipated because there was someone like me. And it reminded me that, you know, like out of every guy in the stake, it was the two gay guys that showed up. And we were able to use who we are and in our love for the gospel to serve. And it was just so beautiful. And it just reminded me that, like, I'm not alone. And for all the questions I have, for all the fears and the ways that I feel pain or there's holes in the fence everywhere and people are sometimes, I feel like they're trying to push me out. It's like, you know what, there's other people like this and I'm going to get through it because I'm not alone.
Do you have any other thoughts on your covenants or anything else the Spirit is bringing to mind that you want to make sure you witness to?
I guess the only other thing I would say from the perspective of covenants is that I've had so many people ask me about my covenants after knowing I'm gay, and what they're asking about is the law of chastity. They're asking about sex. And I find that really, really disheartening because I don't think the same question is asked in the same way to straight members of the church. Like, oh, you're straight. Like, let's talk about covenants. So there's this idea, like I just feel
I can
like
totally see that agenda. Like I
It's
totally
true.
believe that's
it's
true.
It's calling out
I totally believe that's true.
well, and I just
the makeup cow in the room.
exactly, and it really is disheartening to me when I share something personal. I have same-sex orientation, and it helps me love and serve God. And they say, sex, huh? And they just reduce me to this thing that's overly sexualized. I think, man, if we're doing this, we are missing the point. Because
it is your sacred stewardship.
It's a sacred stewardship, and I just hope that listeners can stop going there if someone comes out. And
there's so many other things that you can talk about before that. And probably there's only a small number of people that need to have that conversation.
Right.
And it's usually not someone at Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
Or at the ward Halloween party or whatever, right?
And so, it is this weird juxtaposition because socially, culturally in the church, when I think of my covenants, I think about mourning with those who mourn, comforting the people who need comfort, and taking Christ's name upon me.
Those are the
using
covenants
myself,
as stated in
all of them.
Mosiah 18.
I think all of them.
Yeah, right.
And other people think,
Law of chastity.
law of chastity. I'm like, excuse me.
Charlie, I kind of like how that ties together with this expanding notion.
Right.
So expanding the borders of Zion in terms of, and I also liked how you said, historically we've looked at Zion as the circle and like, our job is to bring them in. Instead, let's broaden this to
The
include
stakes
them,
of
right?
Zion,
I love that. But you're also speaking to a broadening of our understanding and perceptions of covenants and what that even means, right? For sure. And not diminishing them and to just sort of, I don't know how we would describe it, but to a more...
Well, for me, my covenants as a gay member of the church by many people are diminished to not having sex.
Right.
When my covenants are robust, they're beautiful. They're about connection. They're about service.
Just
they're
like
about
everyone
charity.
else's.
And
They're the same covenants as far as I know.
if we give people that, imagine what's going to happen there. And if we can help people see that their covenants are more than that too, because when you ask that, that's training the person to think that's all their covenants are.
Right.
But if we want covenant keepers, if we want missionaries, ministers, let's not go there and just make that wider. Yeah.
Charlie, thank you so much for coming in today. This conversation.
This has
was
been
great.
wonderful.
Well, we're glad you joined us.
We're going to talk about the farm after this.
Hey, you know,
Are you guys gonna send love to the farm girl?
We're sending love to
or
the farm
judgment,
girl.
Or judgment. You're reducing me only to my pig loving part.
Your pig loving heart.
the naturally sweet pigs. Right? And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us either by watching us or listening. The book is Expanding the Borders of Zion. The author is Charlie Bird. He joined us here in studio. We hope that our conversation today is going to help you expand your own borders of love and empathy and be a better disciple of Jesus Christ and a covenant keeper. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us next time. Did you like today's episode of Talk of Him?
Then like and subscribe.
And find us on social media.